adversaries in the world, the People's Republic of China. This is delusional, and it represents everything that's wrong with this administration on how they attack our energy resources. They attack our natural resources. They don't want us to be able to take advantage of the things we've been blessed with, and they want to make us dependent on our adversaries and strengthen our adversaries. This must stop. We need to protect the American people. We need to protect them from our adversaries, and we need to make sure that they are not going to see this continued rise of inflation. This administration is doing everything they can to make us weak and to drive inflation. So I want to thank Senator Sullivan for all his work on this and all he's doing to help protect our national security. Thank you.
Well, Joe Biden is doing everything he can to attack American energy, and we're certainly feeling it in Wyoming, just as the previous senator spoken about, and the lead member of this press conference has spoken about with regard to Alaska. The previous speaker mentioned President Biden's actions as crazy, stupid, and delusional. As an orthopedic surgeon, I would say they were boneheaded decisions by this administration. Look, to say that you cannot, they're going to prohibit oil production in, of all places, the National Petroleum Reserve in Alaska. That's like saying no more picnics in Yellowstone National Park. You know, they've tapped the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, took up almost half of it out of there. We're now at the lowest level in 40 years, and you can't replace it. You can't go after into the National Petroleum Reserve in Alaska. This is a gift to Russia, to Iran, to Venezuela, and to the OPEC cartel, and it is wrong. And tomorrow we're expecting the president to once again reject the Ambler Road project. He's going to mandate electric vehicles, but he's saying you're not going to get the minerals that you need, the key minerals here in the United States to build those vehicles. Oh, so where are we going to go? Who has control right now? China. This is a second boneheaded decision. So they block minerals, they block energy. Oh, and the EPA, what have they been advised? Prioritize climate, the religion of climate, over energy that's affordable, available, or reliable all across the board. We need American energy. We need more American minerals, not less. The administration has it completely wrong. And then today they've made a third boneheaded decision, and it has to do with the BLM. And in Wyoming, BLM stands for the Bureau of Land Management. This is an area that controls public lands, and half of the state of Wyoming is controlled by public lands, and 70% of the minerals under the land in Wyoming is controlled by owned by the federal government. So what the federal law is doing is managing public lands not the way they're supposed to use it, which is for multiple use. We use it for agriculture, we use it for energy, we use it in Wyoming for recreation, for hunting, fishing, for grazing, all of those things. Now the federal government has decided that they are going to, for political activists, lease the public land so that then activists can lease the land and then take it into non-use. They are now describing non-use as a use for public lands. Absolutely foolish. Look, this rule is a stake aimed right at the heart of Wyoming people, Wyoming workers, the Wyoming jobs, the Wyoming minerals, Wyoming energy, all of those things. And Senator Hoeven and I have introduced a Congressional Review Act to overturn this dangerous and outrageous decision, and we're going to continue to fight Biden's administration, which is anti-American and anti-American energy. Thank you.
John. 2 years ago, when Vladimir Putin invaded Russia, Europe realized it had made a dangerous, perhaps fatal mistake by depending on Russia as their sole source of energy. Over the last 2 years, what we have done with them, our friends and allies in Europe, is provide them alternatives and a diversity of energy sources that have been a lifeline to those countries. Here goes Joe Biden once again in doing an election year backflip when it comes to our commitment to help our friends and allies in Europe diversify their energy sources. Just a few months ago, he froze new liquefied natural gas projects in Texas and across the country. Liquefied natural gas, the increased use of that as opposed to coal, has reduced emissions dramatically in recent years. This is something you would think the president would welcome, And certainly our friends and allies in Europe are glad that we are producing that energy here in the United States. But because, again, President Biden wants to throw a bone to the radical left when it comes to environmental activists, he's decided that he'd rather choose them than the American people and our allies when it comes to threatening jobs and emboldening bad actors like Russia and Iran, for example, to fill the void left by our diminished exports to to Europe and other friends and allies around the world. The Biden administration needs to end its war on American energy or risk jeopardizing our national security, our economic security, and our energy security.
Well, Dan, thank you for organizing a small group to talk about the Biden administration's impact on our national security through through energy insecurity, because that's exactly what is happening here. And his tool for the moment is through Alaska, to basically suggest that we should be getting our oil from Iran, from Venezuela, that we should be getting our critical minerals from just about any place other than Alaska. He is destabilizing our security as a nation in a way that most didn't think possible in such a short time period. But that's what we're seeing happen. Yesterday on Capitol Hill, we had the first inaugural Alaska Resources Day. We had industry leaders from across the spectrum, everything from oil and gas to mining to tourism. I would say that we had timber represented, but this administration has chased off that industry in our state as well. But it was supposed to be a day where we were going to be celebrating and recognizing the great contributions that resources have brought to a resource-rich state like Alaska. And instead, we woke up to news that tomorrow was going to be another day at the office for the Biden administration where we basically lock up Alaska, tighter than ever before. And we anticipate that tomorrow, millions more acres will be taken offline, restricted, prohibited from development within the National Petroleum Reserve. The National Petroleum Reserve, an area designated by the federal government decades ago for what? For petroleum resources. But no, we're going to take it offline. In addition to doing that, the administration, I don't know, maybe they just want to get all the Alaska bad news off the table in one fell day, but to basically put a nail in a Roads to Resources project that has been authorized by law, that has been underway, again, for decades through multiple administrations, but basically saying that this resource road, a gravel, private, basically a haul road, is not going to be allowed access through small parcels of federal land. So it's more than a 1-2 punch to Alaska, because when you take off access to our resources, when you say you cannot drill, you cannot produce, you cannot explore, you cannot move it, this is the energy insecurity that we're talking about, because we're still going to need the germanium, the gallium, the copper. We're still going to need the oil, but we're just not going to get it from Alaska. We're just not going to get it from the United States. We'd rather take it from Iran, from Russia, and all the other places where they really don't care about us, and they love the fact that we're being crippled by our own administration.
All right. Everybody's kind of figured out these policies are insane, if you think about it. And I've been up with Lisa, to the North Slope of Alaska. Thanks to you and Dan for your leadership on this issue. We went to Prudhoe Bay, we went to Kaparik, we went to Alpine, do I have this right? And we went to the Section 1002, which is referred to as ANWR. And the rich resources that Alaska offers to meet not only America's but the world's energy needs and requirements. We happen to believe that energy security is national security. That's clearly not the view held at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. And if you look at the Biden administration's policies and the impact they've had on the consumer, you know, we talk a lot about inflation. One of the biggest aspects of inflation is the cost of energy. And energy costs have gone up 38.8% under the Biden administration since he took office. And the Strategic Petroleum Reserve has been depleted and decreased by 43%. Why? Because they don't want to develop all the energy that we have here that's available to us. And so when we get up and talk about these policies, we are trying to appeal to the administration on behalf of the people we represent, whose foundation and core really kind of revolves around common sense. And common sense would dictate that you wouldn't be taking 13 million acres out of supply when the world desperately needs it, and we've got 38.8% increase in energy costs here in the United States. This strengthens and empowers adversary countries like Russia, like Iran, like Venezuela, at the expense of the American consumer and the people in this country who are ultimately going to pay the cost for what are these misguided policies coming out of administration that seems more interested in worshiping at the altar of climate and being obsessed with having everybody drive an electric vehicle, no matter how unrealistic that is. They're going to put everybody in electric vehicles. That is the Biden administration's energy policy. It is not energy security. It is certainly not national security.
No country in the history of the world has ever declared war on its own domestic energy. This is a unique time that we live in. Countries literally since the beginning of time have gone to war for natural resources. The irony is we have all the natural resources we will ever need, not just for us, but for the world, under our feet. But this administration is hell-bent, again, at doing great damage to that incredible opportunity for the American people. Meanwhile, China, as we've drained now our Strategic Petroleum Reserve to almost historic levels, China bought a lot of those, by the way, they have historically high levels in their Strategic Petroleum Reserve. We are at a dangerous time where permitting has been cut off for LNG. Our Strategic Petroleum Reserve as it is at historically low levels. And this administration, again, their answer to every question is sacrifice. We want the American people to sacrifice more. It's a war on the middle class. Because when they fly around on their private jets to climate conferences and pat themselves on the back, the American people suffer. The guy who's got to fill up his pickup, and it costs 40% more than just a couple years ago. They pay that price. And it is true, it's been mentioned. It's almost like a religion. It's nuts. Worshipping a sun god at an altar with now involves animal sacrifice like cows because there's too much flatulence. This is nuts. And by the way, the American people see that. They're going to have an opportunity in November to have the ultimate rebuke of this policy that sets them further and further behind as their energy costs at home to heat their homes 30% more expensive. So the working families of this country are paying the price for this disastrous policy. And again, Alaska is tip of the spear. And I'm proud to stand here with my Senate colleagues from that great state. I don't know how many Missouris you can fit in Alaska, but Missouri's a big state, but Alaska puts everything in perspective. But the resources we have, the critical minerals at our disposal to use, the 21st century will be defined by who wins this great power competition between us and China. And energy security is a big part of that. And the Biden administration continues to wave the white flag.
All right. Well, the first thing I have to say is I just hope there's no cannibals there at the sacrifice of the sun gods. But their common sense is not very common in the White House. You know, the next story I would relate is this president turns his head when there's 300 ghost ships, Iranian ghost ships that are smuggling Russian oil to China. He lets that goes on, but he attacks small oil and gas producers in Kansas, let alone some of these larger fields going on as well. it must be National Fly-In Week, but certainly we're turning 20 or 30 groups at a time through our office. They want to talk about inflation and interest rates, and I explained to them that no, interest rates aren't coming down in the near future when you have a government that's printing money, that's going to spend $7 trillion, take in $5 trillion, spend $1 trillion on interest. I don't see interest rates are going down yet, and they get it. And then they talk, well, what about energy prices? Goodness, we're paying 50% more for gas prices today at the pump than we were several years ago. Our utilities at our home up a third. You know, what can you do about that? And I explained to them next, look, this president has attacked American energy, a war. I think a war is an accurate term now, that there is a war on American energy and American agriculture since the day he took office. They do this through the permitting process, through the regulatory process. Now we're coming up with another new methane regulation that's going to impact the small oil and gas producers. So each one of our states are impacted this in one way or another. And at the end of the day, it's hurting hardworking Americans that carry their lunch pail to work. I don't get it. I don't know why this president hates middle class, but he does. And we're seeing it with the prices of groceries, the prices of gasoline every day as well. Proud to be up here with our senators from Alaska, Senator Sullivan, Senator Murkowski, and support them in their efforts as well. Drill, baby, drill.
Well, thank you, Dan, for organizing this press conference. Thank you for your leadership on this critically important issue. And I want to take a minute to actually thank the reporters who came here today. You all have an important job. And I think there's nothing more important on this issue than telling your readers, telling your viewers, who are the winners and who are the losers of this policy decision from the Biden White House. The losers of this policy decision are, number one, jobs, working class Americans. This decision will kill jobs. Union members will lose their jobs. And this is indicative of a fundamental decision the Democrat Party made in the last decade. They made a choice between the jobs of union members, and union members had traditionally been Democrat supporters, and the money from California environmentalist activists. And the Democrat Party has decided they like the money more than they care about the jobs. And so Joe Biden and the Democrats are killing blue-collar jobs with these decisions. Secondly, the losers are the American consumers, the middle class. Every mom who goes to fill up her truck or her minivan and sees the price of gasoline has skyrocketed under Joe Biden is losing. And understand, that's not an unintended side effect. Joe Biden promised when he was running he would shut down oil and gas drilling if he was elected president. It's one of the very few campaign promises he's kept. But the prices that are skyrocketing at the pump are the intended effect of this decision, and it means working Americans are hurting every day. And you know who gets hurt more? Low-income Americans. Look, for the super rich, for the Bill Gates, the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world, their private jet fuel goes up, but that doesn't hurt them. But if you're a single mom who's struggling to make ends meet, and the cost of filling up your car is a bigger and bigger part of every month's budget, that hurts. That's who Joe Biden and the Democrats are hurting. They're also very directly hurting the state of Alaska. And Joe Biden and the Democrats have a deep antipathy for the glorious state of Alaska. For the record, I don't believe Dan's lies that Alaska is bigger than Texas. But it is nonetheless a wonderful, wonderful state. And who are the winners here? Well, the number one winner here is China. This decision benefits communist China. We're shutting down our ability to mine rare earth minerals and critical minerals, which means we're dependent on China for it. This is a gift to communist China. Who else is benefited by this? Russia. This is a gift to Vladimir Putin. Who else has benefited from this? Iran. This is a gift to Iran. Who else has benefited by this? Venezuela. This is a gift to Venezuela. All of our enemies and the policies of Biden and the Democrats. I encourage those of you in the media to explain how it is possibly rational that Joe Biden and the Democrats love oil and gas when it's produced by Iran and Venezuela and our enemies. And Joe Biden, when he came into office, refused to enforce the oil sanctions that had crippled Iran's economy. And Iran's production went from 300,000 barrels a day of exports to today over 2 million barrels a day. That is a choice from Joe Biden and the Democrats. 2 weeks ago, I forced a vote on the Senate floor to block giving more money to Iran. Every single Democrat but one voted no. I challenge you, write an argument explaining how it is coherent that oil from theocratic lunatics who want to murder us is good, but oil from America that produces jobs here in America is bad. That is nonsensical. And I'll tell you, the final loser that I didn't include in the first list, and that is the environment. You might say, well, okay, yes, we're going to lose jobs, consumers are going to get hurt, this benefits bad guys, but Mother Earth, this benefits the environment. This decision is terrible for the environment. Why? Let me ask you, are you going to stop driving to work? Is Europe going to stop needing oil or natural gas? Are we going to stop needing copper and other rare earth minerals for electric vehicles or for wind or solar? The answer is no, no, and no, which means if it doesn't come from America, where does it come from? It comes from Russia, it comes from China, it comes from Venezuela, it comes from Iran, and every one of them produce oil and gas and rare earth minerals in a much dirtier way than we do. So Joe Biden and the radicals in the Democrat Party are benefiting our enemies, hurting America, and they are hurting the environment as well. This makes no sense. But it is the direct product, unfortunately, of where we are, which is that the Democrat agenda is driven by the radical extreme. And they've forgotten about the middle. They've forgotten about common sense. They've forgotten about the middle class. They only listen to the loudest and most shrill voices in their extreme.
Thank you to Senator Sullivan for pulling this together, and it's good to be here with Senator Sullivan and also Senator Murkowski. Obviously, talking about Alaska and Alaska's ability to produce needed energy for this country. As you've heard, it is about our consumers and inflation and the cost that continues to escalate when we can't produce that energy here at home. It's about small businesses across this country that are hurt by these kind of policies, and it really is about national security. And really, since the Biden administration has been, we've been talking about how the Biden administration is handcuffing our energy producers. Their policies are handcuffing our energy producers here in America. So we're talking about Alaska today, but we should be talking about all across the country, because also today the Bureau of Land Management finalized rules that set up so-called conservation easements that take 245 million acres out of production for energy development across the country. Okay, a week ago, for federal lands where they can produce, they raised lease rates, they raised bonding rates, they raised insurance requirements, they put other restrictions on. Well, who does that hit first? Well, first it hits the small businesses that are trying to produce that energy. Then it hits our consumers who have to pay more at the pump. And look what's happening across the world. We saw an amazing display a number of years ago of our military professionalism, how our men and women in uniform and our technology is better than anyone's in the world. And together we stood with Israel and we stopped missiles and unmanned aircraft and ballistic missiles, prevented them from striking into Israel and killing innocent people. It was amazing on the part of our military, not only the anti-missile defense systems, and there was a whole range of them, but also our aircraft, our naval aircraft, our Air Force aircraft, shooting these munitions out of the sky. And why were they coming? Because Iran was attacking Israel. Iran was, and where did they get the resources to do that? Where did they get the resources? They got it from energy, from selling oil. So when we don't produce that energy here at home, it's not just a national security issue for the United States. It is a national security issue for all of our allies. And that funding isn't just so Iran can conduct these attacks on innocent people. Iran funds Hamas. Iran funds Hezbollah. Iran funds the Houthis. What have we seen? Almost 150 attacks in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden on the part of Houthis. Where did that money come from? It came from oil sales on the part of Iran. And this bit about, oh, well, it's going to help the environment. Really? So if oil and gas is produced in Russia, in Iran, and in Venezuela and places like that, they have the worst environmental standards. We have the best. There is no common sense to this in any way, shape, or form. And it hurts every single American every single day, and it hurts our allies as well.
Senator Sullivan, Senator Murkowski, thanks for bringing us together to talk about a crazy policy coming from the Biden administration once again. This one in significant way impacts our country in dramatic and dangerous ways. Kansas, too, is an oil and gas producing state, and I could be here on behalf of the Kansas oil and gas independent producers, and I am. We earn a living in Kansas, and we produce lots of energy from lots of sources, and that energy is creating jobs and helping families and making life better for a lot of Kansans. But it also benefits every Kansan, every American, by the energy that we produce, because it's produced here in the United States, and it's produced in a way that is more affordable than what we would have otherwise. It's also produced in the most environmentally sound way in the world. But I think this week, as we turn our focus and attention to our national security, once again, energy is a significant component about our country's future. As I say, it matters economically, but it matters for our national security, for our defense, for our country's well-being, for our country's future. And it is crazy that we would be encouraging the production of oil and natural gas outside of the United States. It is a terrible decision by the administration to pause on the export of liquefied natural gas. Our allies and friends need the sources that the United States can provide. We can be, we should be the energy leader of the world. But if you focus on national security, Iran is the largest exporter of terrorism in the world. How do they afford to be that? They afford to be that by producing and selling oil. Iran's economy is dependent, 70% of its economy is dependent upon the production and sale of oil exports. Congress has passed law after law, and I read and heard, and the administration, the Biden administration, we're going to impose more sanctions on Iran as a result of what happened over the weekend. But the reality is this administration fails to enforce the sanctions that are in place. Bipartisanly, we have put in place sanctions against Iran time and time again, and yet, since the Biden administration took office, Iranian oil exports have increased at alarming rates. Iranian oil production is at a 5-year high, exporting 1.8 million barrels of oil a day. Iran sells 90% of its oil to China at discounted rates, freeing up money, funds for China to seek their aggression in the South China Sea and around the world. Iran and Russia have become allies. As we work to find a path forward to support the Iranians in their defense of their nation, this administration is taking steps to make it easier for Russia to have the resources necessary to continue the fight. When we don't produce, the international price of oil increases and Russia gets more return. Again, we've placed sanctions on Russia, but we can see they've not been fully enforced. If you care about America, if you care about the world, this administration wouldn't be doing the things that it's doing. And Americans ought to say, no, thank you, Mr. President. It's time for us to be and to remain that producer of our own energy sources and protect and serve our allies, and most importantly, not reward our enemies. Thank you.
Thank you. Jerry. Yeah. Any questions? Just a wrap up. Sanctioning Alaskans in Alaska, strengthening Iran, China in a move tomorrow that as you heard from my colleagues, makes zero economic sense, zero national security sense, zero environmental sense, and zero job sense. So, yes, sir.
Hey, Garrett Johnson, PNE News, Politico. Wanted to ask, what can or are Republicans in the Senate planning to do to counter this decision?
Well, look, we're planning on doing a lot. These would be subject to a CRA, very likely. This CRA is, I think, would almost certainly pass in the Senate and the House. President would probably veto it. If there are ways in which we can work that to delay that a little bit and get the next administration, you might remember when we were able to do that with 17 Congressional Review Acts. But there's a whole host of other ways in which we can move forward. Look, the Department of Interior, there's going to be no more confirmations with regard to people coming forward in that. You have the chairman of the committee, who probably would have been fine being in this press conference, Joe Manchin, who's been a very strong supporter of Alaska energy. But, you know, part of what we're trying to do here is get the word out. When the average American sees these policies, understands these policies, the most important thing we can do is retake the Senate, retake the White House. That's going to be the ultimate revenge here. And I think when you see the president making these decisions that, again, sell out almost every interest of the United States, environmental, national security, jobs, our allies, for the far left radicals, simply because he wants to get reelected, I think it's going to have the opposite effect. One final thing here with regard to both of these decisions, they are clearly illegal. The National Petroleum Reserve of Alaska was set aside in the 20s by the Warren Harding administration for oil and gas development. It was called the Navy Petroleum Reserve of Alaska. It was changed in the 1970s. The reserve is meant for oil and gas development. The Ambler Road, there's a 1980 law called ANILCA that says the Secretary of Interior shall issue this right-of-way that they're going to reverse tomorrow. So it's lawless, and I think that the impacts on this administration's ability to win elections is going to undermine them. That's the ultimate way in which we reverse these. Yeah.
What's the latest correspondence that you've had with the Biden administration on these decisions?
Well, you may have seen these decisions were leaked to the press earlier in the week, and they finally decided to call Senator Murkowski and myself yesterday to give us a heads up after they had leaked both the Ambler Road decision and the NPRA decision to the press earlier in the week. That's another thing we deal with these guys. Look, guys, I don't have the handout. This is the 62nd. These two will be the 62nd, 62 executive orders and executive actions that the Biden administration has taken exclusively focused on Alaska. Exclusively focused on Alaska. There has been no state, probably in the history of the country, that has been hammered by a federal government more than we have by this administration. I handed the President of the United States this chart we call the Last Frontier Lockup in an Oval Office meeting last year, and I said, Mr. President, with all due respect, I know I'm in the Oval Office, this is wrong. This is wrong. No state should be punished the way in which you do that to my state. If you had a Republican administration that came into office and issued 62 executive orders against puny little Delaware, and Joe Biden was still a senator, he'd be doing what we're doing right now, on the Senate floor, holding press conferences, raising hell. But look, the far left radicals love to shut down Alaska, and Joe Biden is making us his sacrificial lamb so he can get reelected. So it's just wrong. And a lot of it's lawless, like I said. So we'll sue, and we'll probably win, but, you know, that'll take 3 to 5 years. Well, the state of Alaska is certainly going to sue on these things. And they know that, right? They know that. Again, I could give you the law. The ANILCA law says the secretary shall issue a right-of-way. This is the Ambler Road. And it's not subject to judicial review, meaning like this was a great Ted Stevens provision very airtight that they have to do this. And they're looking at us and saying, we're not going to do it because our radical far left environmental allies don't want us to. But think about this, again, just stepping back. Think about what this does with our ability to produce critical minerals and rare earth elements for America when we need them so bad. They are sacrificing all of that at the altar of appeasing far left radicals.
Last question I have for you is, what would you say to your constituents back home over this decision?
We're going to keep fighting. We're going to keep fighting. And of course, Alaskans know how badly this harms our state, particularly, as I mentioned, the Alaska Native people. This administration talks about, hey, we want to focus on indigenous communities, people of color. There's a giant asterisk by that. And by the way, I said this to the White House yesterday when they called me, except if you're an Alaska Native. Then it's like, we're coming after you to screw you. They do it on every decision. This NPRA decision, the entire leadership of the North Slope Borough, the tribes in the North Slope, the Alaska Native corporations are opposed to this NPRA rule. They have come down here 8 different times. 8 different times. They've traveled 4,000 miles to meet with Secretary Holland. You know how many times she's met with them? 0. 0. I hope you guys write that. 0. And these guys talk about they care about indigenous people, not the indigenous people from my state, I can tell you that. Yep.
One last thing. You guys have some quote-unquote must-pass bills coming up, bills that will likely pass, big bills. Any chance you would consider or think you could put a rider on one of those?
Well, we're looking at all options, right? Let me give you another example of what's going on right now. The Francis Scott Bridge, right, that everybody now wants to rebuild real quick, all federal dollars, and we can't build a road to the Ambler Mining District. I mean, these are the kind of things that there's such a double standard here. So we're looking at all different options, but it's an important question, and it's different elements of strategy. But again, elections have consequences, and we're hopeful that the best way to reverse these is to send Joe Biden packing and retake the Senate majority in the U.S. Senate. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Appreciate your interest. And if you want to come to the
trọn đêm nay để nhớ thương anh. Em nghe tình yêu thức dậy êm đềm, nhớ từng nụ cười ánh mắt, nhớ lời ngọt ngào âu yếm, tóc em thơm giấc ngủ dịu. Biết giờ này anh có nhớ em không? Có nghe tình yêu thức dậy trong lòng? Đêm từng màu thời gian đến, bóng hình người mình yêu mến, ôi nhớ gì hơn nhớ người yêu. Rất chân thành ước nguyện trọn đời yêu anh, chớ đừng giận hơn em nhé. Anh ơi, đừng bao giờ nói chia lìa, sẽ làm tội nghiệp em lắm. Đã thương nhau chớ phụ tình nhau, thức trọn đêm nay để nhớ thương anh. Sương rơi lạnh câm cạnh vật im lìm, ước gì mình đừng ngăn cách, ước gì nhà mình chung vách. hai đứa mình thức trắng đêm nay. Anh ơi, lòng em thì rất chân thành, ước nguyện trọn đời yêu anh, chớ đừng giận hờn em nhé. Anh ơi, đừng bao giờ nói chia lìa, sẽ làm tội nghiệp em lắm, đã thương nhau chớ phụ tình nhau. Thức trọn đêm nay để nhớ thương anh, sương rơi lạnh câm cạnh vật im lìm. Ước gì mình đừng ngăn cách, ước gì nhà mình chung vách, hai đứa mình thức trắng đêm nay. Ước gì mình đừng ngăn cách, ước gì nhà mình chung vách, hai đứa mình thức trắng